To talk about this afternoon is actually the 503B, and along with that, the 503A landscape. And just as a way of disclosure, I have really no conflicts of interest, and the information that we're going to give you is accurate at the time that we put these slides together. I do have some updates that will pour in. These are the objectives. We're obviously going to talk about this marketplace. We're going to talk about some common citations that the agency is using, especially against outsourcing compounders. And we are, for the 503As, we are going to help you analyze and vet or give you best practices for analyzing and vetting the outsourcing compounders that you may choose to use. So let's dive in. So the general landscape of 503B outsourcing, and to give you a quick history lesson, right? So 503B was created as a direct result of the New England compounding disaster in 2012, and 503B was created as part of the Drug Quality and Security Act. So President Obama signed that in November of 2013 and established this area of practice. So it's a complex ecosystem, and if you look at the 503B registration and how the current structure is put together, there is obviously a direct line to the FDA, but there are other agencies that are moving into the picture or have been moving into the picture pretty regularly. And whether it was intended or not intended, there are several states that, in addition to FDA registration as a 503B, in order to provide into their states, they require additional licensure. And in general, we're seeing two basic models. One is that there is a direct application that has to be made to the local state board of pharmacy, case in point, New York, or you need to seek application from the local state Department of Health. And examples of those would be New Jersey or Texas. That's the system that's set up there. And again, if the 503B is engaged in the compounding or the processing of controlled substances, then you're going to get overlap of the DEA and other agencies. I would put those into the category of, depending on the 503B scope and specialization, that could be OSHA, that could be the local EPA. So there are many overlapping agencies when you set up a 503B that you will have to deal with. Additionally, and I think those of us who sat through Gabrielle's FDA presentation this morning, this is going to shift as we talk about the implications of the MOU for 503A practice, as well as hospitals becoming more and more dependent on 503B providers. So all of these pieces fit together to create a pretty complicated system as far as obtaining product. But we're going to focus on the 503A and B. So what I wanted to do is, this is really a good time to sort of draw a distinction between GMP and pharmacy practice, right? So for the pharmacist on the line, our education, our focus, our history has always been patient-centric, real-time provision of care under a board of pharmacy umbrella. Very patient-centric, very patient-focused, in real time, more reactionary. Good manufacturing practices, quite the contrary, right? Product-focused, not generally in real time. There's nobody waiting at the gates of Pfizer, hopefully, for the next lot of Viagra to roll off the line. And they're governed by not Board of Pharmacy provincial regulation, more GMP. So that would be 21 CFR, specifically parts 210 and 211. So when we think about that, and you talk about FDA activity in inspecting 503A versus a 503B operation, there's an inherent disconnect because the FDA, and we'll show you data to prove this, is the FDA has really sort of focused on doing what they think they do well and what they do well, and that is surveying to 21 CFR. However, when you use that yardstick in a 503A operation, it creates great confusion, and we'll show you some examples of that. Adding to this confusion is the FDA's method, where they really look at and they really operate through not only regulation but regulatory guidance. And since 2014, when they started to issue guidance not only to the industry, not only to manufacturers, but to compounders, we have seen 28 guidance documents or substantial regulatory policy statements that directly impact 503B compounding or 503A pharmacy practice. And I've listed them out there, and I want to talk about one in particular, but I think it's important to mention that Gabby mentioned this morning. Her focus was, and she did spend a good amount of time talking about the bulks list. And I think the headline for today is that anybody engaged in the compounding of H-chloroquine got up this morning and got a bit of a shock. The FDA has decided that that is not in the best interest of 503B and has taken it away from us. The guidance documents relative to what constitutes essentially a copy in both A and B practice is something that gets a lot of attention when the FDA comes knocking. But I think what's important to remember is in all of these regulatory statements, and I thought it was very interesting this morning, Gabby mentioned the infamous 1 mile rule in the hospital compounding document. And that's that. I always get a chuckle out of that. I refer to that as the miracle mile. As far as I know, and she confirmed it this morning, that particular guidance has never been enforced or cited in the US, but it sits there as part of the FDA's thinking. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Use of regulatory guidance by the FDA, and I took the time to paste up the language from each guidance, and it's right there on the screen. It really constitutes not legally enforceable responsibilities. It really just publishes what the FDA's current thinking today is, and unless a specific regulatory citation is mentioned, it is just that. It's the agency's opinion today, and that could change tomorrow. So that becomes interesting when the FDA, when we construct FDA responses for clients, or when you think about how to deal with the agency once they've come to your door and have come knocking. So it takes you into some pretty shadowy areas if we start talking about the FDA's opinion versus what is truly regulatory and what is enforceable. This is a great article. It appeared in 2019 on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and really here, this was an article about the food industry, but it has applicability to our practice because basically these guidance documents are really in the case of the food industry, because they have much deeper pockets broadly than pharmacy practice does, it really sort of feeds these lawsuits, because if you really think about it, and the basics in administrative law, right, is that you issue a proposed rule, you seek comments from your constituency or from the affected parties, you propose a rule, you seek comment, and then you promulgate rules that reflect the feedback that you got, and then you put it into practice as a real regulation. The agency, to date, chooses not to do that and chooses to work in this really shadowy sort of parallel universe. And to steal a term from an author that I go to quite often, it becomes this sort of trip into unreality, right? Because you're really the FDA will not take the time to go through the regulatory process, and you're basically fighting this opinion based system. However, they've already done their damage because they've put it down in a 483 as if it were fact. Case in point is the FDA's Insanitary Conditions guidance. This is the most sweeping document of those 28 guidance documents that I mentioned earlier. And really what makes this scary, and it starts out very innocently. And it was actually a stroke of brilliance when the agency rolled this out, because this came out at a time in 2016 when there was a little bit of pushback from the profession and the 503Bs to say, well, wait a minute, insanitary conditions really speak to GMP. Every board of pharmacy, if you dig into state regulation, every board of pharmacy uses similar language in that they will say at some place in their practice act, they will say that a pharmacy must be run in a neat, orderly, and sanitary manner. So, but by the FDA using the term insanitary conditions, which really points to injurious conditions based on filth that could be injurious to public health, including death, was brilliant, because then there is a link between pharmacy practice, 503B, and this guidance document. Now, what makes this really scary is this document is so sweeping. It says in the document that it applies to areas that are directly in the compounding space, areas adjacent to the compounding space. And if you read to the end, after you find out the butler did it, it says that they can cite these conditions anywhere in your facility. So that gives them pretty broad brush. And I can tell you from experience that any noncompliance to this particular guidance document will trigger swift and quick regulatory action. So this one, if anybody listening hasn't read this document or looked at this document, it's time to do so. So what I'd like to talk about is that a lot of my talk in this section will be based on data that we have collected since the New England compounding disaster, and we have combed through absolutely every document that's in the public domain released by the FDA. We maintain the largest private database of this information outside the FDA. And what we do with it is we really use it to flavor our building of demonstrated best practice. We use it to assist clients with FDA responses. We also use it to update our policy, procedure, and our training methods to stay in line with what is the agency's focus, what are they up to this week. And if you look at it, since New England compounding, and I can bring you up to date because I've refreshed the data up to March 19th. The agency has visited over 500 establishments, both A's and B's. There are several physicians in there. There are analytical labs in there. There are over 35 hospitals, health systems, and hospital-owned compounders in that number, and they have conducted more than 780 inspections. The FDA has been operating in 46 of the 50 states, and I believe 6 months ago, they visited Alaska for the first time. So their reach is immense, and looking at the numbers here, 407 different FDA personnel have signed inspectionary documents. So they do have the bandwidth to be just about anywhere they want to be. And when compiling this data, I ran a quick check, and the FDA is creeping up on close to 6,000 inspection days in the field. So really, what does that mean when we talk about first outsourcing facilities? Outsourcing facilities can expect to see the FDA. If you really comb through the Drug Quality and Security Act, part of the voluntary paid registration that a 503B participates in, the regulation is pretty clear. The FDA must, even though they're charging you for your fee is allegedly an annual inspection fee, the FDA does use a risk-based system to figure out a frequency of visits. The regulation quite clearly says that window can be no longer than 48 months. So the FDA does have the burden to visit every 503B in that window. So currently, as we sit today, the FDA has 70 outsourcing providers. If you go to their website, they'll have 70 listed. Only 58 actually have been inspected by the FDA. The FDA has a pretty wide window. That 290 days is an accurate figure. So, for those of you that are 503A, or for those of you that are using the services of your 503B, it is not uncommon that you can have a fully functional 503B that has never been visited by the FDA. And you should accommodate that in your vetting process if you're talking to this provider about using their services. Just as a sort of factoid there have been more outsourcing providers that have dropped registration than there are actually current outsourced providers. So what does that look like? Where is product coming from? This was provided to me from my friends at Pharmacy Purchasing and Products. And for those of you that are not familiar with this publication, you simply need to go to mag.com and sign up for a free subscription. They'll send it to you print or electronic. A lot of good information in there about the compounding universe. And so the information that they sent, as you see there, the top providers in the marketplace, obviously, CAPS B. Braun, one of the oldest providers, Cuva in there, Avella Specialty, and so on. So, this is data that was collected from DOPs. So this is actual live data from hospital directors that are purchasing these services. So that'll give you an idea of what the landscape looks like from the consumer side. When we look at the numbers, again, the FDA, with that incredible bandwidth, the hotspots seem to be the Dallas field office of the FDA, which encompasses New Mexico, all of Texas, and Oklahoma. They're responsible for almost 16% of the visits, so that equates to 75 503B visits. Irvine, the LA office, is not far behind at 51. And then the Tampa office of the FDA, 47. And then bringing up the lower on the list are offices like New England, the home of New England Compounding, as well as the Nashville office, which was the epicenter of all of the injuries or most of the deaths in the initial phase of the outbreak. And so here are the 483s issued by office for those of you that want to see if they're active in your backyard. So I present that to you from our library. And specifically, if we want to drill down into what the citations were on these 483 documents, though the top 5 are there. So just for those of you that are not comfortable or not as well versed in reading those inspectionary documents, I'll try to translate for you. The aseptic processing areas are obviously production areas, clean room areas. So what they are pointing to are the monitoring of environmental conditions and the systems for cleaning and disinfecting rooms used to produce sterile drug. When they refer to clothing, that's really garb, sterile garb or non-sterile garb, depending on your type of compounding, and also PPE. And so those are citations for not having appropriate garb. Number 4, procedures designed to prevent contamination are not established. So non-compliance to good practice, that's a citation. And then the rounding out the top 5 list is the lack of a written testing program to establish stability characteristics of drugs. And the FDA has zeroed in on facilities using what the agency likes to call industry references for determining BUD. So what they like to call industry references are things like the Handbook of Injectable Drugs, King's admixture, any data that comes from what pharmacists would consider authoritative reference, the FDA is referring to as industry references. So there's a little angst about that. And that usually gets exacerbated by those of you that are out there in the 503A universe that are assigning BUDs that are in excess of 28 days. So if you look back into 797, there's language in the current chapter that talks about any BUD that is not from instrumentally verified data that you own is really a theoretical BUD and really needs additional authoritative investigation. So be very careful there. The FDA is citing that in A's. Now, the focus changes for B establishments, and that is because of the higher burden that had been taken on by the establishment and the voluntary registration. Now, the problem here is that in 2013, when the DQSA was rolled out, there were and there are missing pieces that Congress had tasked to the FDA to complete and sort of fill in the blanks. So there is some disparity here in how the FDA surveys those businesses. So again, the top citation is for some deficiency in physical plant that the agency took exception to. The next is policies and procedures to control or prevent microcontamination were either not there or not followed. The third one is a mystery to me, only because if you look at the DQSA, the actual language of the law, this is one of the few sections in the law that actually gives clear direction. what has to be on the label, what has to be on the labeling, the accompanying information that's not on the immediate container label, and why and how people are just don't get it here is a mystery to me. So they continue to cite it. They continue to make a great deal about areas of non or episodes of non-compliance, and rightfully so here. Number 4 is aseptic processing areas are somehow deficient for cleaning and disinfecting. That's usually the lack of using a complete set of sterile equipment, from the disposables to the consumables to the actual cleaning products. So that's something in your vetting process, if you're a 503A that want to talk about purchasing these services, that's an area that is pretty easy to check and pretty easy to verify. For those of you that are providing 503B services, this is a good cue for you to go in and to really look at your process and make sure that your process is fully compliant in that way. So sterile everything is the name of the game there. The other thing is, if you look at these citations, the B versus the A, there are similarities, but there are glaring differences. Sorry about that. Can't make that go away. Whoops. Can't make that go away. Let's see. Sorry about that. Let's do that. And then let's go back to this. Sorry about that. I'm having my own technical difficulties. I think the other thing that we should take a minute to talk about is number 5. And number 5 is, again, one of those distinctions that is unique to GMP rather than the practice of pharmacy. And the FDA is zeroing in on it. And I think this is a very difficult, sometimes cultural argument or cultural lesson that 503Bs, especially the smaller ones, the larger 503Bs that come from a pedigree of big pharma or their leadership comes from that pedigree, they are already very aware of the role and the activity of the quality control unit, and really the quality control unit being the overarching unit that really has sway in all of throughout the process, from the procurement of API all the way through the compounding process, through the labeling, through the final packaging, and then ultimately the release of product. The difference is in the world of pharmacy, it's that dispensing pharmacist is releasing that prescription. In the GMP world, that autonomous quality unit, whether it's composed of pharmacists or not, take up that role. So there is this cultural sort of disconnect sometimes. The other thing that the agency has focused on in the last several years, and you see it manifested through some of the extensive recalls that they've required, or for those companies foolish enough to really resist a recall suggested by the agency, the infamous, press release notifying the universe that a particular compounder has refused the FDA's request to launch a recall, and some of those providers are no longer here. So that's something to keep an eye out for. But the really for me, the discussion about not running aground discovered discrepancies in cases where product didn't leave your hands is a big issue with the agency. So near misses, failures that never left your facility, the FDA's expectation and the GMP expectation is that you learn from every compounding interaction. And it's irrelevant whether any of that batch left your hands. And I think especially the smaller 503Bs that we've worked with are not getting this and not understanding the value of having that process. And those are the providers that have a less than robust QC unit or have people that are woefully inexperienced to deal with that kind of learning experience. So that to me is a really big key and something that you should discuss with your 503B provider during QC meetings or the annual release of data to you, or when you're vetting a provider to purchase institutionally fixed formulas or non-patient specific product from. So with that, I will I'm trying to leave a good amount of time to for discussion and for questions. So I'm going to sort of round this out by saying, in retrospect, whether you're an A looking over the fence at a B, or whether you're a B trying to start up or trying to look in the mirror, there's no substitute for constant vigilance on the part of any professional in the process or any compounder, as well as people that are procuring or want to procure. You need to have a robust process to vet. If you're a 503A, make sure you know where your product is coming from. If you're a B and operating a B and you are providing the same burden, this is something that you can't dabble in. You have to be behind it every day. And when from either side of the table, when you talk about compounded product, I think one of the things that we learned, I recently read Kill Shot. That's Jason Dearborn's book on the New England compounding tragedy. I think this bullet was totally lacking in the New England compounding example. It's all about traceability. Can you trace all of the components, all of the supplies, and all of the personnel that had responsibility to that batch from cradle to grave? The trackability. Can you track, as the compounder, can you track where your product is, where did it go, and how is it being used? Because ultimately you want to have absolute recallability. And the same for the 503As that are using these products, or in some cases creating compounded product. Can you trace it? Can you track it? And if necessary, can you recall it? So that is really the crux of, good modern compounding practice. And whether you're using a paper-based system or whether you're using an automated system, it's the same standard. Traceability, trackability, recallability are the watchwords. And all professionals, whether you're purchasing or whether you're providing and creating these compounded preps, you need to be aware of all the prevailing best practices and prevailing regulation. There was a presentation before this session, and Chris Lee was talking about changing or refining a GMP process. If that's simply to become quicker or more efficient, and you've skipped steps that strip out some quality, well, that's not really a best practice, is it? And so, I would be leery of altering your practice to do that. But if you have If you are in the spirit of continuous quality improvement and you've found a new and better way to do something, well, then, looking at it with that scope, with that sort of magnifying glass, that's something that you can build on. However, efficiency for the sake of economics is not what Chris was talking about. It's not what I'm talking about. It's not what you guys should be thinking about. So, with that, I am going to flip through and open it up for questions. And let's see if I can operate the chat. All right. While people are getting their thoughts together, I can also throw some more data at you. I think the previous session to this talked about COVID, and one of the things that I didn't really get into was the impact of the pandemic on the efforts of the FDA. There was obviously early in 2020, the second and third quarter, the agency, like all other agencies, flipped over to the COVID response and took their folks out of the field. I can tell you they are back. They are back in earnest. They are more likely to respond based on two things, either a MedWatch complaint or a request by a board of pharmacy. And that's universal, whether you're an A or a B. So I've been spending some quality time with some friends of ours from the FDA in the field. I can also tell you that there has been a marked decrease in published documents from the compounding universe. So to date, and this is almost a complete quarter, the FDA has posted no new 483s for either 503As or 503Bs. Their focus right now appears to be coming out of the Center for Tobacco, a lot of vaping and a lot of nonsense coming out of there. The Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. So for those of you compounders that think that the FDA is not looking at your websites and the literature that you're hanging on that website or claims that you could be making, please do not believe that. They are looking at your drug promotion. For those of you that have salespeople in the field, you want to make sure that you have robust policy and procedure in that area. And there is quite a glut of documents from the Centers for Radiological Health. So the FDA is coming out of their malaise. So things are, as the nation gets more and more vaccinated, I think we're going to see the FDA back to pre-2020 levels probably by the end of the year. I know boards of pharmacy are out there. I know the NABP is reinstituting VPP inspections. So please don't think that what you're doing is not being scrutinized. It is. So no questions, eh? Yep. And I know it's late in the day and I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I can tell you that that is one of the biggest sticks that both the FDA and the Department of Justice use if they find improprieties or overpromising or something wrong with your website. You are guilty under federal statute of wire fraud, and that's a pretty broad. The language in that statute, in federal statute, is pretty broad, and the penalties are pretty harsh. So you want to look at your website. You want to be thoughtful about things, marketing materials that you're posting there, and any claims that you make. I would be very, very careful of. Also, giving a compounded product a flashy name or really giving it some sort of unique packaging and trying to develop a trade name around it beyond a simple copyright could get you into an area of creating a new drug under the meaning of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and that'll definitely get you a visit from the agency. So be careful, please. I'll leave you with this thought: the motto, the unofficial motto of the DEA is caveat emptor, buyer beware. So, so really be leery about what you post to your website.